Hey everybody, my name is EJ Quantumens. Thank you for tuning in. I wanted to do a video. I actually kind of tossed the idea in my mind whether I should do a video or not with respect to Gay Pride, the celebration of Gay Pride, and what it means, and perhaps even what the term two-spirited means to me, and also a term that is also meaningful to me, which is the people of the purple light. And so I decided that I would do a video. Many of my friends and colleagues and my contacts and people who are in my Facebook group have been expressing an interest in some of these conversations, these teachings that I can share with you. And so I thought I'd give it a shot. Also, I just wanted to make a disclaimer that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Indigenous community as a collective. I'm merely giving you some of the insights and the opinions and the stories and the teachings as I've been taught through my experiences and through the people who I've been mentored and who I value as elders and knowledge keepers. So I want to be able to make sure that you're aware that I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody, and nor am I speaking on behalf of the Indigenous community as a collective, because I am not. Saying that, our Indigenous community is very, very diverse. It's very, very, I'm not going to say the word complicated, but it kind of is, in the sense that, mainstream tends to look at our community as a general community that we, for example, all live in teepees, or that we all live in igloos. Do they even use that term anymore? I don't even know. And that we all have braids, that we all wear feathers. All these myths or these notions that people believe of the Indigenous community. Now, some people do. Some people do wear braids, and some people do wear feathers, and some people still, we live in teepees in the sense that we use it for our ceremonial practices in some regions and whatnot. So, but it's important that we don't generalize. So what I wanted to say is that we are in the month of June. In June, for Indigenous people, represents a very important day, as June 21st being Indigenous Day. Now, as an Indigenous person of mixed blood, I tend to look at Indigenous Day as an everyday thing. But it's nice that or the government or whomever, the powers that be, have decided to designate June 21st as Indigenous Day. So thank you. Also, we're in the month of Gay Pride. So most of the Gay Pride kickoffs started on June the 1st. And in the Toronto area, the Greater Toronto area, most of the activities prior to COVID, most of the festivities rather, had commenced or would commence on June the 21st. And then I think it sometimes changes, but the parade itself is usually the last Sunday of June, which happens to be one of the largest pride parades in the world. So what I wanted to have this conversation with you, to use it as an opportunity to provide some insights and some teachings. What I wanted to talk about first is really this notion or this term as two-spirited. Now, as you may or may not know, the term two-spirited is relatively a new term, but the essence of one who identifies as two-spirited has been around since time immemorial, and many nations across Turtle Island have varying different names to identify those who fall under that title. And so as I've been taught, back in 1997, there was a World HIV/AIDS conference for Indigenous educators around the world that took place in Australia. And at that time, there was an elder that was recognizing there was a common storyline that was occurring with many of the different educators there. And everybody essentially was speaking about the same thing, but there wasn't officially a title or a name or a term that was being used. And at that time, this elder identified the term two-spirited, the ability to possess both male and female essences in one's physical body that is intended for indigenous people. And I think that is a term that has really created a momentum and is valuable, is very important. It serves a purpose. It helps those who are struggling perhaps with identity, who fall under the LGBTQ plus community, that we have our own term, that we have our own community within the indigenous community that seems fitting, and so it also serves to a degree, I suppose, for political purposes, identifying a type of people, a group of people, for funding applications and that sort of thing. So there's that kind of conversation. But for me, I don't identify as a two-spirited individual. And a lot of people get really puzzled by this. A lot of people are very shocked by this because mainstream society, I've had many people approach me saying, well, you're indigenous and you're two-spirited, and there you go. There's that assumption, that generalization that all indigenous people identify as two-spirited, and we need to be very careful with that, because that isn't the case. It's not the case for me. Those who do identify as two-spirited, hats off to you, and that is part of their identity, and that is part of their journey, and that should be celebrated and acknowledged and recognized. So that's important to know. But to also know that not everybody identifies as two-spirited. For me, I want to take a step back for a moment. I'm going to give you a little analogy of where my mindset is, and perhaps why I would not identify as two-spirited. Saying that, I like to give the notion, I've spoken about this oftentimes before, about the term elder. Now, in our indigenous communities, whether it be First Nations, urban settings, municipalities, whatnot, there are many different individuals who identify as elders. And for me, I look at that word very carefully. I don't want to toss that word out or use that word in such a way that is disrespectful. I've been taught that the term elder, or the essence of a person who identifies as an elder, is a person who's been recognized by the community, recognized for possessing perhaps the language, perhaps possessing, lived experiences. Also those who perhaps know some of the ceremonies. Not necessarily an elder who knows all the ceremonies, or an elder who perhaps who knows one or two ceremonies. There's no number to it. A person who comes to the table with skills, knowledge, attitudes, and values that is aligned with living what we call minobemadizuan, living that good, balanced life. Someone who, now I'm not going to say somebody who is non-judgmental, because at the end of the day, we're all human. And to a degree, regardless if you're an elder, I ain't going to put an elder up on a pedestal, because at the end of the day, that elder is also human and makes mistakes and has their own biases and has their own judgments. But for me, I think an elder is able to recognize that and take a step back and approach things in the most humble, respectful, kind, loving manner. And I think that, for me, is a definition of what an elder is. And so, but the point being is that an elder is ushered into that role because of all the different facets and layers that they possess. The community ushers them in that role. we don't self-proclaim ourselves, or people should not be self-proclaiming themselves as elders just because it's a number thing, because they reach a certain number in age that they automatically get this magic wand and they poof become an elder. I don't think that's how it works, or at least in my mind, that's not how it works. I know many young individuals who are recognized as elders because their community has recognized them as elders and ushered them into that title and that role, and they are not 50, 60, or 70 plus years old. And so again, it has nothing to do with an age factor, and I think we need to be mindful of that. But saying that, all that conversation about what I believe to be an elder, the community brings you into that title, leads you into that role. And so for me, the term two-spirited is that. It's the ceremonial circles, or the community ushers you into that title or that role, whatever term you want to use. But in this case, we're using two-spirited. So therefore, the community ushers you into that role. Why? There's the big question. For me, if we're going to use the term two-spirited, again, it's not a term that I use, but if I'm going to use that term as an example, it's that ability to possess male and female essences from a spiritual context, not from a sexual context. And I think this is the confusion. For example, I've been approached by many LGBT communities in Toronto to help facilitate or sit on committees or have conversations, and they say, oh, let's pick EJ because he's an Indigenous gay man who is two-spirited. And I am very quick to correct them and say that we mustn't generalize. First off, we should always ask somebody how they identify. And there is an opportunity to learn here. And that the term two-spirited in itself, if we are going to use it, is a term that is not a blanket approach to, or a brush that we brush over and to apply everybody as two-spirited. No. What was happening is that people were using that term to identify me because I'm an Indigenous gay male, and they were determining my identity based on my sexual orientation. And that, in my opinion, is not accurate. If we're going to use the term two-spirited, it is a term that is used based on a spiritual orientation, and being able to see, view, observe, understand the lenses from both a male and female spiritual perspective. And for me, that seems more fitting in terms of a definition. I would not self-proclaim myself as being two-spirited. It would be something perhaps that the community would have to usher me into that role and identify me as. But let's shift the conversation a little bit to the term people of the purple light. This is a term that resonates with me, that makes sense for me. And I'll explain why. You see, when I was a little boy and I was in the sweat lodge, we used to go to sweat lodge oftentimes, maybe 2-3 times a week. My uncle, who was my elder, his name is Ignace Quanamans, who's my mother's older brother, who lives in Armstrong, Ontario. He would run our sweat lodges. And I remember one time as we enter into the lodge, he would always sit on the right side upon entering the lodge. And then there would be a placement of male, female, male, female, male, female in that order. And I remember one time he places me beside my mother. No, he places me beside him and my mother. And to me, I was confused. And I didn't understand why. And this notion of why in the language doesn't exist, as opposed to a term that is used, what is. Now, when I looked at him, he could see that I was puzzled. He could see that I was confused. I didn't understand. And I looked at him and I said to him, why? And he goes to me and he looks at me very closely in the dark. And I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old at the time, maybe even 10. And he says to me, it's not for me to tell you this. Your journey, your experience, your life will teach you the lesson and understand. You will understand what this means when the time is right. Now, as a young person, I'm like, what the heck? Like, enough already, just tell me. But he wouldn't. He just did tell me, though, that something about you is different. Something about you is unique. And it is those people of the purple light, the people who have that strong purple hue about them, that we must protect, that we must be mindful and care for them and nurture them, because they are very important and they need to be viewed in a very compassionate way. You see, purple in our philosophies in the northern woodland territory, purple is a powerful medicine color. And it is the essence, the core of one's being. It's where spirit sits. And so years thereafter, I started to understand. It started to make sense to me. And I realized people of the purple light, I could connect with that. I could identify with that. That yes, I've always felt all my life as a little boy, from 5, 6, 7 years old to as my current age of 48, I've always realized, I've always understood that something was different. And that how I view things and how I process things and how I see things and how I feel things is just different. And now some people will say, oh, you're just a fool. You're just making up all this stuff. No. I know me, and it's taken a long time and a long journey to get to where I'm at. And for me, I understand what my uncle was talking about when I was a little boy. And so that term, people of the purple light, resonates with me. And it is meaningful to me. And for somebody who I place such value and respect when he would say that, reflecting then to now, I honor that. It is my role and responsibility as a Loon clan to not only do what is required of me of my clan, but it's also important for me to recognize my role as a person of the people, a person of the purple light. And so that makes sense to me. And that's all that really matters. So the point being is that however one identifies, whether you're going to use the term two-spirited, or whatever term or name or word that is used in the nation that you come from, you should be able to understand that history, what that word or that term means, its significances, the responsibilities of that term, and to be able to honor it, and to also reflect on your knowledge keepers and your elders that have the stories and the teachings of these words. And so for me, from the 1850 treaty area of the Northern Woodland and Anishinaabe people, for me, the term people of the purple light makes sense. And this is how I identify. Now, I'm not saying that this is a term that we should be using moving forward for everybody. That's not what I'm saying. Those who identify and use the term two-spirited, if it's meaningful to you, utilize it, embrace it. At the end of the day, identity is very, very important. It speaks to who you are and where you come from, whatever that might be, wherever that might be. And so I also recognize that it's a question of who you are and where you come from is not an easy question for some to answer. And so all I can say to those who struggle with those questions, struggle with their own identity, is to sit with the elders. Sit with an elder that your spirit gravitates towards. And like Justice Sinclair would say, don't just pick any elder. Know your elder. Ask the questions. What are their teachings? Where do they learn their teachings from? So you have to do the work, and you have to ask these questions, even if it makes people feel uncomfortable. And if somebody, when you're asking the question, is giving you these bizarre answers, or something is not feeling well in here, I always say, run the other way. Get ahead while you can. Because there are some people out there some elders that assume these titles and these roles that perhaps, in my opinion, should not be doing that type of work, should not be assuming those roles. There are some amazing elders out there. There are some amazing knowledge keepers out there that can help support you and guide you and mentor you to strengthen whatever teachings or whatever issues that you might be struggling with. But at the end of the day, knowing who you are and where you come from is very, very vital. It helps the entire process become stronger. So on that note, Gay Pride is among us, and so it's going to have various different meanings to many different people. And I'll leave the conversation here for now. I'll do another video to continue the conversation of what pride means to me. We're already rolling up on approaching 23 minutes, and so I'll do a second segment, and then we'll continue the conversation. So on that note, miigwech. Thank you for listening. And if anything that was said that may have offended you or upset you, please, that's not my intention. It's never my intention. But I always like to make a little joke about something, Mainstream always tells indigenous people that we need to get over it. So guess what? At some point, you too will also get over it. Because at the end of the day, why do we need to carry this energy that weighs us down? We should be able to lift each other up and live in the most honorable, impeccable, true way that honors ourselves. Miigwech.